There is a moment in almost every significant human life when reason has taken you so far as it could, and the thing you most need to do still lies on the other side of what reason can justify. You cannot think your way into a marriage. You cannot calculate your way into a vocation. You cannot reason your way into the life that is genuinely yours. At some point, you have to take a leap, and the leap, by definition, cannot be guaranteed. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We have spent 8 videos building a precise understanding of Kierkegaard's diagnosis of the human condition: despair, the fears, anxiety, the either or, and the single individual. Today, we arrive at the concept that is, in many ways, the culmination of everything we have been building. Kierkegaard called it the leap of faith, and I want to give you the full philosophical account because it is far richer, far more demanding, and far more universally applicable than the popular caricature of it suggests. I also promised you at the end of the last video something else: the point at which Kierkegaard's philosophy reaches its own limits, and what lies beyond it. I will keep that promise at the end of today's discussion. What I want to introduce there will, I think, be genuinely surprising and genuinely important. So let's get started with today's topic, the leap of faith. Kierkegaard explores the concept of leap most fully and most dramatically through the story of Abraham in a work called Fear and Trembling, published in 1843 under the pseudonym Johannes de Silentio, which translates as John of Silence. The story is from the Genesis. God commands Abraham to take his son Isaac, his beloved son, the son of his old age, the son through whom God had promised that Abraham's descendants would be as numerous as the stars, and sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. Abraham does not argue. He does not negotiate. He rises early the next morning, takes Isaac, and begins the 3-day journey. He binds Isaac on the altar. He raises a knife, and just when he was about to kill him, an angel intervenes and Isaac is saved. Johannes de Silentio tells and retells this story multiple versions from multiple angles precisely because he cannot understand it, and his inability to understand the philosophical point. He understands the case of a tragic hero, the general who must sacrifice his daughter for the sake of his army, the leader who must take an impossible moral choice for the good of the community. These are comprehensible. They are painful, but they are within the ethical framework. They can be explained. But Abraham's case cannot be explained. No ethical framework justifies what he was prepared to do. He was not sacrificing Isaac for the good of his community, not for a principle, not for a social duty. He was acting in response to a completely unverifiable, completely unshareable command from the God. He could not explain himself to Sarah, his wife. He could not explain himself to Isaac. He could not explain himself to anyone, because the language of explanation is the language of the ethical, of the universal, of what everyone can, in principle, understand. Abraham's act exceeds all of that. This is what Kierkegaard calls the teleological suspension of the ethical, the moment when the personal absolute direct relationship to what is infinite takes precedence over everything that social morality can demand or comprehend. Now, I want to be very precise here because this is the point most easily misread. Kierkegaard is not saying that Abraham was right in any conventional sense. He is not providing a justification for acting against morality whenever you feel personally called to do so. Johannes de Silentio himself says repeatedly that he cannot understand Abraham, that if he were in Abraham's position, he would be paralyzed. What he's saying is that Abraham represents a mode of relationship to the infinite that transcends ethical framework entirely. a mode he calls faith, and that this mode is not accessible to reason, not justifiable by social standards, and not communicable in ordinary language. The key distinction in Fear and Trembling is between the night of infinite resignation and the night of faith. The night of infinite resignation is comprehensible and admirable. He has faced the impossibility of his situation, the unattainable love, the unreachable goal, the irreversible loss, and he has renounced it. He has made his peace with the finite by giving it up in favor of something infinite. This is heroic. It is what Kierkegaard calls a certain peace and rest and consolation, but it is also ultimately a kind of noble defeat. The night of resignation holds the finite at arm's length. He does not expect to receive it back. The night of faith does something more astonishing and more incomprehensible. He makes exactly the same movement of renunciation. He gives up the finite. He faces the impossibility. And then, by what Kierkegaard calls the value of the absurd, he expects to receive the finite back. Abraham gives up Isaac, and Abraham believes, without any rational justification whatsoever, that he will receive Isaac back. Not in some other life, not in some spiritual sense, but here, now, in this world. The measure of Abraham's faith is not his willingness to sacrifice, but his trust, his absolute, groundless, rationally unsupportable trust that God's promise holds even in the face of its apparent contradiction. Faith is not the consolation of impossibility. It is the audacity to act within impossibility as if the promise still holds. Now let me bring this down from theological to the universal human expression, because the secular applications of these concepts are, I think, where it really becomes most immediately powerful for your life and for mine. Think about what it means to enter a serious relationship, not the aesthetic flirtation or the ethical contract, but the genuine, unguarded, fully committed relationship between two people. At some point in that process, reason exhausts itself. You have thought about it from every angle. You have considered every risk. You have weighed the evidence as carefully as a human being could. And you still do not know. You cannot know, because genuine commitment involves another free consciousness whose future choices are just as unpredictable as your own, and whose inner life you can never fully access. At some point, you either leap or you don't, and the leap by definition cannot be justified in advance by the evidence. The same is true of vocation. The person who waits until they are certain that a particular path is right for them will wait forever. Certainty of vocation does not precede commitment to it. It follows from it, gradually, imperfectly, over years of actually living inside the commitment. You do not know you are a philosopher, a teacher, an artist, a doctor before you commit to being one. Your discovery is a living truth. And the same is true of the deepest personal commitments of any kind. The decision to bring a child into the world, the decision to forgive someone who has deeply wronged you, the decision to begin again after a catastrophic failure. None of these can be fully justified in advance. All of them require a movement that exceeds what reason can sanction. All of them are, in Kierkegaard's precise sense, leaps of faith. Certainty is not the prerequisite of genuine commitment. It is one of its possible fruits, arriving long after the leap has already been made. Now I want to introduce something I've been building towards across this entire series, and which I promised at the end of the last video. It is the point at which Kierkegaard's own philosophy reaches its own limits, and what I believe lies beyond it. Kierkegaard's entire project, from despair through fears, through anxiety, through either or, through the single individual, and now through the leap of faith, has been a sustained argument that the self must take itself seriously, must choose itself, must commit itself, must leap into the groundlessness of genuine existence. All of this is true and valuable. It is a map of the grasping mind trying progressively harder and more honest solutions to the problem of its own groundlessness. But here is I want you to notice. Kierkegaard treats the groundlessness of existence as a problem that the self must overcome through commitment. Choose and the anxiety resolves. Commit and you become someone who can bear the uncertainty. Leap and you will receive the finite back by the value of the absurd. In every case, there is a self that leaps and something that receives the leap. The Madhyamika Buddhist tradition, the tradition in which I have my own practice, looks at exactly the same groundlessness and says something more radical. Not a problem to be solved, the truth to be recognized. All things arise dependently. All things exist relationally, without a fixed or independent nature, including the self that is doing the choosing, including the one who is about to leap. When that is understood, not as a philosophical proposition, but as a living recognition, something shifts within. The anxiety Kierkegaard describes does not get resolved through commitment. It dissolves at the root, not because certainty has been found, but because the mind that needed certainty in order to function has been seen through. The leap is still made, the commitment is still real, the love and the vocation, the engagement with the world are fully present, but they are made without the grasping behind them that generates further suffering. Because the self that needed to grasp has been recognized as dependently arisen, empty of fixed existence, not the kind of thing that needs to grasp in order to exist. Kierkegaard reaches the edge of the cliff and says, "Leap." The Madhyamika tradition looks at the same cliff and asks, who exactly is it that is standing here? And when you look carefully at the one who is about to leap, read carefully, not philosophically but experientially, what do you find? I'm not suggesting that Kierkegaard was wrong. I'm suggesting that his philosophy reaches a genuine and important truth about the human condition and then stops just short of the radical recognition available. The recognition that the groundlessness he is asking us to bear with faith is not a problem at all. It is simply what existence is. And a mind that has genuinely recognized this does not need to resolve the groundlessness through commitment, through the leap, through receiving Isaac back. It is already in every moment at home in what is. This is what I understand by what the tradition calls nirvana. Not a destination, not a blissful state, but a mind that knows the truth of all things and no longer experiences their uncertainty as a threat to be overcome. The discomfort was always in the resistance, not in the openness itself. Now we come to the last section of this particular video where I talk about the therapeutic aspect. So what is there for all of us from this particular analysis that we have done so far? So Kierkegaard is asking you to stop waiting for certainty before you act, to recognize that the life you are meant to live cannot be fully mapped in advance, that the map is always made by walking, and that the walking requires the willingness to step forward without knowing where your foot will land. This is not recklessness, it is not impulsiveness. It is the recognition that the most important things in human life, love, vocation, genuine commitment of any kind, are not the kinds of things that can be safely approached from a distance of perfect rational calculation. They require the leap, and the leap requires courage. Not the courage the person who is afraid of losing, the courage of a person who is afraid and leaps anyway. The knight of faith does not look fearless. He looks from the outside like any ordinary person. He takes joy in the finite world. He is not visibly heroic. What distinguishes him is entirely inward, a trust so complete and so groundless that it looks to everyone who cannot understand it like madness. And the further recognition from the tradition I come from is that the leap is made most cleanly when one who leaps is not clinging to the outcome. Not because the outcome does not matter, but because the clinging itself is the obstacle. The most committed act is the one made in full engagement with what is at stake and full release of the need for a result to be of a particular way. This is what the Bodhisattva does. This is what the deepest forms of love do. This is what genuine vocation does when it is truly lived. So here is the practical point for this week. Identify one area of your life where you have been waiting for certainty before committing. Not because you genuinely need more information, but because the leap itself feels too exposing, too risky, too irreversible. And ask yourself honestly, what would it mean to make that leap? Not with the guarantee that it will work out, but with the full recognition that it cannot be made in any other way. You don't need to make the leap this week, but the act of seeing clearly what the leap is and what it requires, and that waiting for certainty is not caution but avoidance, is itself the beginning of the movement Kierkegaard is describing. In the next video, we arrive at one of the Kierkegaard's most beautiful and most underappreciated concepts, repetition. Not routine, not nostalgia, but the willed reappropriation of one's own existence. What it means to choose your life again, freely, with full awareness after having genuinely faced it. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.